Some of the ideas and information that will be presented throughout this video come from a Substack essay titled The Dawn of the Post-Literate Society by James Marriott. Literacy is a source of power. Those with the tools to access and digest useful information are far more likely to excel and succeed in difficult endeavors, increasing their autonomy in the process. If literacy was as simple as its definition on Google, which is the ability to read and write, then we wouldn't be facing a literacy crisis. But it extends far beyond that. Literacy, especially as it pertains to this video, is about being able to comprehend difficult pieces of work and translate that comprehension into something that benefits you. It's about being able to sit and read a plain page of text with little to no stimulation for long periods of time without getting distracted. It is, as UNESCO puts it, a means of identification, understanding, interpretation, creation, and communication in an increasingly digital, text-mediated, information-rich, and fast-changing world. And for the first time in hundreds of years, literacy rates are starting to decline. In this video, we'll uncover not just how we got here, but what society might become as we seek deeper into diminishing literacy. Historians largely agree that written language was created, at least in part, as a means of maintaining power. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, writing systems like cuneiform and hieroglyphics were closely guarded by scribes, who often worked in service of kings, priests, or ruling elites. Access to written records meant access to law, religion, and commerce, and those who couldn't read or write were locked out of these realms entirely. The same was true in medieval Europe. Manuscripts were painstakingly copied by hand, often by monks, making them expensive and scarce. This meant that aristocrats, clergy, and wealthy patrons were essentially the only people who could afford to own or even read them. The church, for instance, held enormous influence by keeping the Bible in Latin, a language most common people couldn't read, ensuring that interpretation remained in the hands of priests and scholars. Those handwritten versions of the Bible also costed the equivalent of thousands of dollars today. In 1050 AD, it's estimated that only 1% of the population was literate in Western Europe, but by the time the 15th century rolled around, a device was created that would revolutionize literacy rates for centuries to come: the printing press. Now, even after the invention of the printing press, books didn't immediately become accessible to everyone. Prices dropped dramatically, but they still required disposable income, and becoming literate required a luxury of time, which was a luxury that poor people didn't have while they were working to survive. Across cultures, from Imperial China's scholar official exams to colonial societies where enslaved people were often banned from reading, literacy consistently acted as a dividing line between those with power and those without. But some books did begin to become more affordable to the average person. Economist and historian Jeremiah Dittmar reports that by the late 15th century, many books in European markets cost less than a day's wages for a laborer. Though these were usually texts like pamphlets, broadsides, and chapbooks, small, cheaply printed booklets aimed at popular audiences. Still, it marked the start of a trend of more books getting into the hands of the average populace, and by the 18th century, a reading revolution in Europe blossomed. Rough figures for Britain indicate 100 new titles per year up to about 1750, rising to 600 by 1825 and to 6,000 before the end of the century. No longer was history and knowledge reserved for the elites. The mass spread of written language into cohesive, printed formats empowered average citizens to actually start questioning the systems they were being indoctrinated into. It encouraged them to develop their own lines of thought, to fight against conformity, and therefore fight for equality in almost every area of their lives. And that's really why this surge of literacy is so important. Reading and writing exposes you to entirely new ways of thinking and rearranges your thoughts into usable information. Works like Locke's Essay Concerning Human Understanding, Rousseau's Social Contract, Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws, and Diderot's Encyclopedia fundamentally reshaped how people saw government, society, and even themselves. With that sort of information, you have more power over what you choose to think and do, and that is why the democratization of information was so terrifying for the elites. Some might argue it still is.
Smart people don't like me.
There's a reason why some news sites only give reports favoring one side of a story. Like how news on the left report the removal of Jimmy Kimmel's live show as a politically motivated blackout of censorship, but the right depicts the ban as a necessary response to Kimmel's, quote, inappropriate remarks and spotlight alleged leftist pressure campaigns. And this is something that I was actually able to discern between thanks to today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground news is one of the best ways to avoid trapping yourself in an echo chamber and making sure you hear all sides of a story. They show you what every news outlet is saying about a certain topic, like the Jimmy Kimmel situation, and show you which way that news outlet leans, how high their factuality is, and who they are funded by. That way, you can take in articles from the left, right, and center to reach a more objective conclusion on things, even on more controversial issues like the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey. You can gather a lot of additional necessary context by reading stories from both sides and the center, so you don't end up trapped in a bubble of misinformation you might not even know you're in. And once you've been using their platform for a while, they start to show you where you might have blind spots based on the stories you've consumed so far by creating a personalized blind spot feed, which shows you stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. I really believe in what Ground News is doing as a company. I truly believe they're helping to dissolve misinformation and division on the internet, and it's why I'm so excited to work with them and why I want to continue working with them in the future. So if you're interested in cutting through the noise and building a more nuanced view on current events without algorithm manipulation, then you can go to my link, which is ground.news/Cole. That's also the first link in the description, and you will get 40% off their Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access. As public access to knowledge and information started to rise, public education rose with it, contributing to higher literacy rates. And by the 20th century, universal literacy was the norm in just about every developed country. But it was at the dawn of the 21st century where things started to take a turn. Only if you looked deep enough. If we were to simply observe global literacy rates, they are statistically the highest they've ever been. The literacy rate for all males and females that are at least 15 years old in 2025 is 86.3%. But the main contributor to this rise is due to the increased access of literacy tools in lesser developed countries. In first world countries, for the first time in hundreds of years, we're beginning to see the opposite trend. In 2023, the OECD found that in most countries, the literacy proficiency of the lowest performing 10% of the population has declined, with similar declines in numeracy. At the same time, the performance of the top 10% has improved, leading to widening skills inequalities within countries. Singapore and the United States displayed the largest skills inequalities in literacy and numeracy. Additionally, in their Education at a Glance report, they stated that while educational attainment is at an all-time high, 13% of tertiary educated adults, that's college-educated adults, failed to reach even the baseline literacy proficiency level in 2023, meaning they could only understand short texts on familiar topics. And the same can be observed in younger folks. The nation's report card, which evaluates American middle and high schoolers' proficiency in various subjects, has reported the lowest scores in math and reading in the past 30 years. But even outside of America, the global PISA scores, the most famous international measure of student ability, plummeted in the last decade. This highlights two very dangerous hypothetical developments. The first is that access to books and education, tools that once helped reduce inequality, is starting to slip back towards something resembling aristocratic times. And the second is that the quality of formal education seems to no longer be at the standards it once held. But is that really the case? Or is it another development entirely? We cannot ignore the correlation between the beginning of these downward trends and the advent of the modern smartphone. Just about all these graphs start trending downward around the same time everybody started carrying an iPhone in their pockets. I'm not some Unabomber technology hater. I love using technology on a day-to-day basis, but it absolutely has disrupted the way we engage with education and literacy. This is a point I've hammered home in many previous videos, so I won't spend too long on it, but short-form content and endless scrolling platforms have undoubtedly shifted our expectations around knowledge acquisition and entertainment. Now I can even watch long-form YouTube videos in 2x speed.
Which I do pretty often, and I bet a lot of you are doing right now, and I'll talk really fast so you can't even understand what I'm saying. If you're fucking listening to this in 2x speed, you can't even understand it.
Hell, I can even pay for YouTube Premium to watch videos in 3x speed. And on short-form platforms, you can press down on the right side of the screen and consume more information in 30 seconds than a Victorian child learned in 3 years. When you feel like you're learning everything you need to in 30 to 60 second bites, you condition yourself to believe that all information should come as quickly, easily, and be as stimulating as the content you consume. So when you're sitting in class listening to a 40-minute lecture from your teacher or trying to read and comprehend a book for more than a few minutes, it's gonna feel so much more difficult. In 2015, a study titled "They Don't Read Very Well" had college students participate in a recorded 20-minute reading session in which they were asked to read the first 7 paragraphs of Charles Dickens' Bleak House out loud, then translate each sentence into plain English. Here's the first paragraph if you want an idea of what they were asked to read. The researchers found that 58% of the students understood so little of the introduction to Bleak House that they would not be able to read the novel on their own, and only 5% had a detailed, literal understanding of the first paragraphs. I'd imagine that if this study was conducted in the present day, the numbers might be even worse, which is supported by the more recent Atlantic article, The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books, as well as the frequency in which 18-year-olds are now reporting that they have difficulty thinking or concentrating and learning new things. Also, I'd argue that the incentives for learning don't feel as enticing to the average young person. You know, in the 17th or 18th century, the only way you were getting out the mud, the only way you weren't going to be poor is if you became literate. It was literally required for survival. If you contrast that with today, a lot of young people, especially in the US, they live in middle-class households, pretty nice houses. They have their needs met, and so they don't really feel the effects that a lack of education can have until later on in life. And on top of that, if the systems put in place have made it harder than ever for the average person to get a decent paying job, own a house, and start a family, why exactly should you put in all this effort to actually engage in difficult reading and writing? Why try hard when there will be less rewards and when you can just use AI instead? I'm not saying this should be the attitude that young people have, nor am I encouraging it, but I completely understand why a young person these days would look at a 400-page book assigned to them and think to themselves, hell nah, I'm using ChatGPT on that shit. So what does that mean for the future of society? What will society look like if literacy rates continue to dwindle? Well, firstly, I believe that, at least to some extent, the transmission of knowledge, of works that have been passed down for centuries, that feature some of the greatest minds, ideas, thoughts, and histories, are at a serious risk of going extinct. And to answer the question of what society might look like in the future, we can re-examine and reiterate what society looked like before literacy was common. People have far less access to economic opportunities, better nutrition, and environmental sustainability. And the present-day data backs this up. A study by the Barbara Bush Foundation and Gallup in the US finds that adults who reach a baseline literacy proficiency that's level 3 earn on average $63,000 versus $48,000 for those just below that threshold. Another study in sustainability of young adults in Turkey found a strong association between food and nutrition literacy and sustainable, healthy eating behaviors. But what I fear just as much, if not more, than these obvious consequences is how we start treating each other. Unlike the 14th century, we now have access to any information we could ever ask for, and yet we are getting closer to a literacy level that is comparable to a time when information was scarce. If the information is now there, but we are lacking the skills to use it, what do you think happens in a society like that? What happens is people lack the focused attention to seek deeper, nuanced understandings of personal and societal issues. They develop a very close-minded view of their beliefs and experiences, and they only pay attention to the surface-level, short-form information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. When that happens, civil discussion becomes more rare. Disagreements that don't cause extreme divide become a thing of the past. And while we all fight amongst each other, trying to prove our points by citing an out-of-context TikTok we saw or a biased ChatGPT prompt response, the people in power grow to immeasurable heights of wealth and control. Inequality isn't just growing because it's the nature of capitalism, it's growing because what we choose to engage with on a daily basis is designed to make us dopamine-addicted zombies rather than intellectuals who know how to fight against inequality and form coherent thoughts and solutions. So what's the way out? How do we stop this from getting worse? Well, first, I'd like to show you this advertisement that I saw on Instagram Reels today, which some people see as a solution. The idea of this app on the surface is not bad. I'm sure the creator has great intentions, and it's certainly better than just doom scrolling. but to me, it feels like the perfect representation of how people think critical thinking is developed rather than how it is actually developed. Honestly, there isn't that much of a difference between getting fed short bursts of facts from a larger text and an engaging TikTok that tries to teach you something. Yes, there is a time and place for getting information quicker and having it be more concise, and I'm not trying to demonize the summarization of all information, but you have to, and I mean have to, find some time in your week to deeply engage with long, difficult forms of reading and writing. I've been trying to find a succinct way to put my thoughts around this for a while now, and I think this sentence best describes it. The things that should have gotten easier are starting to get harder, and the things that should have stayed hard are starting to get easier. Access to affordable housing, community, and education should keep getting easier as humans continue surviving longer and longer on this planet. But now, for young people, it's starting to get harder again. And the things that should remain hard, like developing deep connections with other humans, reading long texts, and writing long, well-thought-out essays, have gotten way too easy. The only solution that you can actively participate in right now is to voluntarily add more friction back into your life. Do you know how long it took Immanuel Kant to write his 900-page book, The Critique of Pure Reason? He couldn't just pull up ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, write me a 900-page book that makes me sound smart and shit. He had to work tirelessly to refine his ideas over and over again, reread it over and over, and rewrite sections over and over for years until he produced something valuable that he felt he could give to the world to help people understand his ideas better. And for you to understand a book like this, it requires you to keep it close at hand, return to unclear sections, test the consistency of its arguments, and contemplate its central ideas until they resonate. This sort of higher order reflection is the exact type of literacy you need to cultivate if you don't want to find yourself turning into a puppet for people in positions of power, and that alone should be enough motivation for you to break away from the world of convenience and speed. Get into the classics, read tough philosophy, write in your own words what you think about the ideas being presented in these texts and what you agree or disagree with. Place as much friction as you can between you and your distracting devices by blocking apps, buying something that locks you out of your phone entirely, or places you in an environment where you don't have any access to these things. Despite everything I've said, I'm actually very optimistic for the future. I think more and more people are getting fed up with social media and the internet, and they don't see it as fun and enjoyable anymore. They're tired of the vapid nonsense that's just designed to provoke you and make you emotional. And I see a revitalization of literature happening the more and more that people speak up about topics like this. While the people of centuries past biggest problem was a lack of information and an inability to acquire it, our biggest problem is a lack of discernment in the face of too much of it. We're drowning in content, stimulation, and opinions, but starving for wisdom. So the real challenge lies in learning how to filter the information we do have, to slow it down, and to transform it into knowledge that actually matters for your life. That is another great definition of literacy. Because if you don't take the responsibility to shape your own mind, there are plenty of corporations, systems, and institutions that are more than happy to shape it for you. Add friction back into your days. Make reading harder. Make thinking harder. Make writing harder. Because the very act of wrestling with those difficulties is what will keep you free and prospering. Let me know your thoughts, opinions, and solutions in the comments below. I'm always encouraging some healthy discussion down there, and I hope to talk with you guys down there. If you enjoy these sorts of videos where I talk about modern problems and some of their solutions, you can check out my entire playlist of video essays on modern issues. Now I'm heading out. I love you guys. Stay optimistic. I'm always optimistic. I love humanity despite everything we've done and haven't done. I don't know. And I'm going to go. Goodbye.